2014 EU directive on public procurement. And I and others in the House of Lords have been asking ministers to guarantee that they will replicate that directive in the UK law as they undertook to do with all European laws in the UK. It hasn't happened yet. More worrying, they introduced a bill to replicate the European healthcare arrangements called Healthcare International Arrangements Bill. It transpired that it wasn't about Europe at all. It was about what happens to the UK after the WTO rules, and it would have allowed anyone from anywhere in the world to bid for healthcare support and payment. And I think it is the NHS equivalent of our concerns about chlorine-washed chicken. The Liberal Democrats led in the Lords on this bill to raise awareness on this really, really serious opportunity that the Tories were trying to take. We were helped by the Delegated Powers Committee, who said that this was the greatest grab of powers they'd ever seen. Frankly, even more than Henry VIII did, and they're called the Henry VIII powers. More and more people joined us in the Lords as we were fighting. It included retired judges. And we won. The act that was passed a bare month ago is back as being what it should be, which is the healthcare European Union and Switzerland arrangements. We have protected the NHS. It's vital that we are frank about the cost of the WTO rules, and that is why we absolutely have to stop Brexit. Thank you. Now, it's always my role to sort of be the air steward and point out the exits, and there will be collection at the exit when you leave. Please do help. Our fundraising is going well, but we could use even more money to make sure that we can get our message across. But it's my great pleasure now to introduce Ed Davey. Ed is our Home Affairs spokesman, and he was the Secretary of State for the Environment and Climate Change. Ed.
Thank you very much, Sal. Wasn't it fantastic last Thursday night? You know, from Cotswold to Chelmsford, from Hull, across the country, Liberal Democrats were winning. And as we approach this election for the European Parliament, I think we will win again. Sometimes people say they don't know what we stand for. I think they get the message now. Now, I want to elaborate on this message just a little bit, with reference to our environment and to crime. Because if you want to stop climate change, you need to help Liberal Democrats stop Brexit. And if you want to catch some of Britain's most dangerous criminals, you need to help the Liberal Democrats stop Brexit. A greener, safer Britain requires us to stop Brexit. As a minister, I spent 5 years negotiating in Brussels for our country, and in my experience, Britain being at the table of Europe was hugely positive for all people across our country. Other European countries listened to Britain. Britain had huge continent-wide influence, and Britain would win the arguments and the votes. Take climate change, take the climate emergency. We know that climate change can only be beaten by countries working together, by international cooperation. Yet Brexit means Britain walking away from international cooperation in our own continent. This would be morally irresponsible enough. But when we remember that Europe has led climate action in the world, and in the recent past, Britain led Europe towards more climate action, walking away from that leadership responsibility is a climate crime. I know this as Britain's Climate Change Secretary of State when other large EU countries were not willing to raise Europe's ambitions on reducing dangerous emissions, I took the lead, armed with Liberal Democrat policies, forcing the Conservatives against their original intentions to agree a British negotiating mandate of the highest climate ambition. The EU's then Climate Change Commissioner, Connie Hedegaard, thought I was being unrealistically ambitious. But I formed an EU-wide coalition. We called it the Green Growth Group, made up of countries who shared at least some of our ambitions. We engaged in 2 years of EU-wide climate diplomacy, and Britain won, raising climate targets for the year 2030 across the whole of Europe, persuading 27 other countries to match our ambition because we were at the table. And through raising the EU's ambitions on climate change, we got the US under President Obama. We got China under President Xi to raise their ambitions. And that led directly to the 2015 Paris Climate Treaty. So Liberal Democrats in Europe making global progress on climate change. But given the climate crisis, we need to do much, much more. And that will be 100 times more difficult if we Brexit. So our European manifesto is based on Britain staying in Europe. And Liberal Democrats in the EU would seek even tougher climate targets for 2050. I'm so proud that this manifesto proposes a net zero carbon target for Europe. Liberal Democrats were the first major British political party to propose a net zero carbon tax for Britain in 2007, and now we're the first to do it in Europe. But we also need to stop Brexit to stop the criminals. European cooperation on crime has been one of the biggest steps forwards in fighting crime in the last 30 years. Well, that's what a British detective told me when I met him in Europol in The Hague 10 years ago. Through Europol, Eurojust, through various shared databases, through the European arrest warrant, Britain has been stronger against organised crime gangs, against terrorists, against people traffickers, against rapists. So I have one question that I hope journalists ask the likes of Nigel Farage and Brexiteers in the Conservative and Labour parties. Why do Brexit leaders like criminals so much? Why do they want to stop our police having access to key European crime databases, information our police currently use millions of times every year? Why do Brexit leaders want to make extraditing criminals from British prisons more difficult? Why do Brexit leaders refuse to celebrate the huge success of the European arrest warrant in closing down Costa del Crime in Spain, where British villains used to be able to escape justice? It is shocking. Be very clear. The world's most dangerous criminals want Brexit to go ahead. The criminals know the security deal that has not yet even been agreed, the political agreement, is weak, pathetic, and will make every British citizen less safe than now. Brexit is 1,000 crimes or more waiting to happen. That's why Liberal Democrats want to stop Brexit. So, ladies and gentlemen, this European election gives our country opportunities. More opportunities to avoid climate catastrophe. More opportunities to beat crime. And an opportunity to say loud and clear to the Brexit parties of the Conservatives and Labour, give the people the final say. But it's also an opportunity for all Remainers across our great country to join the Liberal Democrats in our campaign to stop Brexit. Thank you very much. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, the amazing Jo Swinson.
Liberal Democrats, it is good to be here. I wanted to start with a story about an experience I had 15 years ago. I was in the city of Bucharest in Romania. My dad had been working as an economic development consultant in Bucharest on projects to help the accession of Romania to the European Union. And while he was working out there, then every so often, my sister or I, my mum, would go out there and have a little mini city break and catch up with Dad. Now, on this one occasion, we went to see some of the sights, and he took me to see the People's House. Sounds quite nice and fluffy, but the name is very misleading, because this was not anything for the people. This was the project of the megalomaniac Ceausescu, the dictator of Romania. And it was a grand project to create a huge building. This is the heaviest building in the world. This has 1,100 rooms. And the grandeur of it was completely grotesque when you consider the poverty that people in Romania were living in and what level of resources were put into building this huge vanity project. Forced labor was used to make it happen, and it's estimated that 3,000 people died in the building of this palace. It is now used as the seat of government in Romania, but such is its immense and vast scale that 70% of the rooms are still not used. That I tell because that was the communist legacy. That was what people in Eastern Europe and similar types of travesty, what they were subject to under communist rule. And the European Union is such a contrast. And I think it is important that we take a proper view across history of what the European Union has really achieved, because it has been an immensely successful project in creating peace and security. The way in which the European Union has been able to promote the liberal values of human rights and democracy across parts of Eastern Europe, the way in which we have been able to encourage Turkey to take steps towards improving human rights, the way in which the European Union is a foundation for peace. We've seen it in the Balkans. I remember when I went to Kosovo and I spoke to people who were just reeling from the aftermath of that brutal war. And yet, when you look to their future, how could they live side by side with these people who they were fighting with? And the answer came back clearly that the European Union was going to be the hope, that under that umbrella, these countries may be able to live in peace alongside each other again. And of course, the 70 years of peace and security, where it is inconceivable that the major powers of Western Europe would go to war against one another, so often dismissed as if that's something, well, you know, of course that's the case. That is a huge achievement. And in our own country, in Northern Ireland, the way in which the European Union has been that cornerstone that has underpinned the Good Friday Agreement, and which was shockingly absent from the debate in 2016, and yet has come home to us all so vividly, particularly when you hear the young people of Northern Ireland talk about their future, the children of the peace process, so powerful in what they want to keep Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom in the European Union. And at a time when we are at a time when we are in more uncertain global times than for as long as I remember. We have the rise of these strongmen leaders, this tide of populism and nationalism rolling in. We have Trump in the West and Putin in the East. We are in between. And in these times, where do we want to be strategically? Who do we want to be alongside? Surely this is not the time to turn our backs on our closest allies, our closest neighbours who share our liberal values. And for all these reasons, and for so many more, for the reasons Ed outlined, for the economic reasons, for our influence in the world, for what we need to do, we must stop Brexit. And Liberal Democrats, make no mistake, we can stop Brexit. We Liberal Democrats have been fighting for our place in Europe for 50 years. We have a proud history of doing this as the pro-European party. We have been fighting for a people's vote for 3 years. We were the first to call for a public vote on the final deal. Long before it was fashionable, we Liberal Democrats got there first. And I am delighted, fellow Liberal Democrats, that is a fight that we are winning. That it started with us, but it is now a movement that includes people from all different parties and none, that has seen millions of people campaigning on this issue. We should be proud. We have come so far. We are winning. And, you know, we really are. 704 games. We are winning again. Well done, every single person involved in creating those storming local election results last week. Well done to each and every single one of you. And so, at this launch of our European Election Manifesto, our message could not be clearer. We Liberal Democrats want to stop Brexit. What do we want?
Stop Brexit!
What do we want?
Stop Brexit!
Are you sure we want to?
Stop Brexit!
But you have a choice. You have a choice. Because the wonderful people in our campaigns department have decided to produce not just one cover for our manifesto, but there is an alternate. So, what do we think? What do we say? Are we sure? Okay, I'm going to do a test here, right? Some of you will have a preference for one of these over the other, right? So whichever one is your favourite, I want you to shout loudest for that one. So first of all... Stop Brexit! I think we have a clear winner. The Liberal Democrat message is absolutely clear. We go into these elections to say, vote Lib Dem, stop Brexit, indeed bollocks to Brexit. Let's go out there and win again. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce the man who has been leading our great party, who has created the circumstances where we have taken a people's vote from being an issue on the margins to the mainstream of British politics, and he deserves huge credit for that, our leader, Sir Vince Cable.
Well, thank you for reminding me, or perhaps not. As Joe's just told us, this is the day of the launch, and we've got two versions of our Manifesto. There's the official and there's the unofficial. And I've spent the day coping with the fallout from the unofficial. I was told this morning that somebody had fainted of shock. I had a radio interviewer who had told me that his Ofcom license was at risk for broadcasting indecencies. And I think my favorite anecdote of the day was the tweet from the political editor of The Spectator, who started, I don't want to be prim and pompous, and then proceeded to give a masterclass in primness and pomposity. But we've had our joke. This is the real story. You know, it is about stopping Brexit. And we mustn't lose sight of that very simple, clear, unambiguous, honest message. And that's what is driving our campaign. Now, why stop Brexit? I mean, many of the arguments have already been won a long time ago. I mean, nobody now seriously disputes the economic and the business arguments. Even the defenders of Brexit now acknowledge that if we leave the European Union, we'll be worse off. Well, what they then say is, well, it's a price worth paying. It's usually someone else who's going to pay the price, somebody younger and more vulnerable. But I conceded that argument. I think what we need to do is something much more positive, which is to stress those things in the European Union, which in Britain we tended in the past to approach a bit apologetically, and to own them, things we believe in. Let me start with the 4 freedoms. The freedom to live, work, study throughout Europe. That is a precious thing, and it's something we believe in. And it's worth remembering, actually, where it came from. British Prime Minister launched the single market, one of Britain's biggest contributions to Europe. And it says volumes about the modern Conservative Party that it's moved so far to the right that they now disown Mrs. Thatcher. And the European nationals who've come here as a consequence, they're not here on sufferance. We value them. They're part of our society. And that's why we believe that, you know, as with Commonwealth citizens, the people who live here, who work here, who pay taxes here, should have the right to vote in national elections. Or to take the point that Joe has just mentioned, Europe's endorsement and support for human rights. Now, this isn't some encroachment on British national sovereignty. These are important principles that we share with our European neighbours. But then the question arises as to, you know, what are all these elections about? It isn't a kind of surrogate referendum. We want a referendum, of course. We want a referendum with the option to remain, and we will fight for that. We'll fight for the people's vote. This election is about getting more members of the European Parliament, who, if we succeed in stopping Brexit, will be there for the 5-year duration. And they will be joining a powerful, influential group of European politicians in the European Liberal group in the European Parliament. And they will be joined by people from France, from En Marche, from Spain, from Quidamos. This will be a powerful European group fighting the rising, dangerous forces of populism. And we've got to be part of that. It isn't just a British problem. It's a global problem. It's certainly a European problem. And we can only fight it by standing together with people who share our values. And there are important things for the European Parliament and the European Union to do, looking forward. And Ed summarised very eloquently the challenges around climate change. There's a very simple common sense point here. You have far more influence and ability to get a strong international climate agreement if you're speaking as part of a unit of 500 million people rather than 60 million. And it isn't just the issues around climate and the environment, critical though they are. One of the big challenges which we cannot deal with at a national level is how do you deal with the really big international global data corporations and the big monopolies that they operate. This is now being tackled properly at a European level. There is a Liberal commissioner, Marguerite Vestager, who has tackled the Googles and the Facebooks, fining them when they don't pay their taxes, protecting data privacy, preventing unacceptable content. These are things that you can do properly when you're dealing with giant global companies at a European level. You cannot do it at a national level. And then there is the international disorder that's been created by the Putins and the Trumps. And we have to stand together to avoid being bullied by these rogue states. And we don't deal with the Trump problem by groveling, inviting him here for state visits. We stand firm against his attempts to wreck the international trade system, to wreck the international climate change agreement, to wreck the agreements on nuclear non-proliferation. And we can only do that in solidarity with the rest of the European Union. Now, my final question is, why the Liberal Democrats? It will not have passed your notice that there is only one vote in the European election, and there's a group of parties, all of whom are, solidly remain as we are. We have to make the case, it's, I think, a fairly easy case to make. We're not just the biggest and best organised of the Remain parties. We're the party that has been consistently strong on this issue, not just in the 3 years of the campaign for the People's Vote, but for half a century before that. You'll remember the role of Charles Kennedy, of Paddy Ashdown. Those of my generation will remember Joe Grumman. We are the European party. And people need to get behind us. I mean, not just that we can be one up on the other Remain parties. That's not the point. We need to be able to challenge Mr. Farage and his Brexiteers. We are now a Remain country. We cannot have an election led by a party like that. So there's a lot of work to do. I'm optimistic, buoyed up by last week. Everybody underestimated us. I think they're underestimating us again. We're doing relatively well in the polls. We shouldn't be complacent. We can do much better. And it's up to you to work with us, get out and campaign, and sell this very, very simple, clear message. Stop Brexit. Thank you.